coffee break, kickball, the dragon, Taiwan, and the Thucydides trap. What a playground rivalry taught me about China, Taiwan, and the dangers of great power competition. By Darrell Allen II, CPA. When I was in elementary school, we used to play this game called Kickball, which was very similar to baseball, almost the exact same rules. Instead of playing with a baseball bat and baseball, you played with a big, hard rubber ball that you would kick. Basically, it had the same rules, and it was a popular game throughout my entire time in elementary school. I remember this kid named Brian. Brian was a big kid, and in 4th grade, he looked like a 6th grader. He probably should have been in 6th grade because, if I am not mistaken, he had been held back a couple of years. Whatever the case may be, Brian was a brute. When we used to play kickball, we started off with 2 people making selections for their teams, one by one. Each team was only allowed to have about 8 to 10 people, and there were a lot more kids on the playground who wanted to play kickball. If you were not selected, you would not get to play. Sometimes it was mostly the same kids who were not selected. The first person always selected was Brian, not because he was athletic, but because he was so big that all the other kids were essentially scared of him. In kickball, you had to throw the ball and hit the other kid, and at my school, we used to try to throw the ball as hard as we could to hit the kid hard. That was what made the game more fun. Well, nobody wanted to throw the ball at Brian or in his direction because nobody wanted to make him upset. Brian was a fighter. Brian must have come from a hard background because he was cool some days, but he always seemed to have a chip on his shoulder. He was quick to fight, and he could fight. He used to get suspended all the time, but he still was a popular kid, and everybody chose Brian. One day there was another kid who joined 4th grade and started to play kickball. I forgot the kid's name, but it was an unusual name that is not really given to a male. It was either Ashley or Brittany, but for the sake of this article, I'm just going to say Ashley. Ashley was not a big guy, but he was athletic, extremely athletic. In gym class, he played all the sports well, and in kickball, everybody's first pick became Ashley. This went on for a long period of time, and I started to see and feel the tension that Ashley and Brian were developing with each other, mostly on Brian's part. Ashley was more popular because he was athletic, and because he just had a better personality than Brian. Whatever the case may be, they ended up coming into conflict in the cafeteria lunchroom. They fought. I cannot tell you who won because it was a good fight, but they both were suspended. Well, I think Brian was expelled for the remainder of the year because he had already been suspended so many other times for fighting, and Ashley was only suspended for a couple of days. When Ashley came back, he basically overtook Brian's position in kickball. He was the most popular kid. I cannot tell you who won the fight, but I can tell you who lost, and it was Brian, because he was expelled and could not come on school grounds anymore to play kickball. The reason I bring this story up is because, in many ways, great powers throughout history have behaved similarly. There is often tension between an established power and a rising power. Sometimes the conflict is unavoidable, but many times arrogance, fear, pride, and miscalculation are what push both sides toward disaster. Well, this morning when I was at work, I was sipping on some coffee and reading various articles on President Donald Trump's trip to China. There are a lot of things on the agenda between the two superpowers. China believes it has finally equated itself with the same level of military hard and soft power as the United States. But in reality, it may never fully achieve that due to its repressive government. However, it has come very close to the military power of the United States, especially when it comes to the Pacific. China is also extremely important in world business and the global economy. There was a lot on the agenda for President Trump and President Xi Jinping to discuss. However, what caught my eye was that President Xi warned Trump over the Taiwan situation. According to the New York Times, President Xi used the example of the ancient war between Athens and Sparta to warn about the growing tension between China and the United States. The idea behind the Thucydides trap is that when a rising power starts challenging an established power, war often becomes more likely. In Xi's comparison, China sees itself as the rising Athens, while the United States represents Sparta, the established power trying to maintain its position. This warning caught my eye because the US government, people in academia, think tanks, defense alliances like NATO, international corporations, and even small businesses are all trying to figure out if China is going to push the button and try to invade Taiwan by 2027. The fact that this was one of the first things the Chinese president wanted to tell Trump was very concerning. Basically, he was telling Trump that China is an upcoming power and wants the United States to stay out of its way, especially when it comes to Taiwan, or there will be conflict. That conflict could be detrimental not only to the United States and China, but to the entire world. The global economy is deeply interconnected. Everything from semiconductors, shipping routes, medicine, fuel, electronics, and manufacturing could be impacted by a war in the Pacific. To be clear, I am not saying that the United States should not come to Taiwan's defense if China does invade, but we should not poke the dragon. We should be ready to go to war if necessary, but we should avoid actions that may instigate the conflict. There are reports that the United States has depleted a significant portion of its missile stockpiles during the Iranian conflict and has so far spent approximately $29 billion. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the United States expended more than half of the pre-war inventory of several key weapons systems during the conflict. Reuters and the Associated Press also reported that Pentagon officials told Congress the war has cost roughly $29 billion so far, much of it tied to replacing munitions and repairing equipment. As I discussed in my previous article, Coffee Break, there is no easy ending. This has achieved, as of today, very little strategically. The regime in Iran has not changed, but one thing it probably did achieve was making the United States less ready for a conflict in the Pacific. I am not saying the United States is not ready to defend Taiwan, but naturally it will take resources for that defense, and we now have fewer resources than we had before the Iranian conflict. Reviewing the past 500 years, the Harvard Thucydides trap project identified 16 cases in which a major rising power threatened to displace a major ruling power. 12 of those 16 rivalries ended in war. That does not mean war between China and the United States is inevitable. It is quite possible there will be no conflict. China may not invade Taiwan and may allow it to exist as a symbolic part of China with a different government. And the United States and China may continue to coexist economically despite their rivalry. The United States has plenty of problems, including mounting debt that threatens the US economy, and China has many of the same problems, probably even worse. It is not a good time for either country to go to war. At the same time, weak economies have not stopped great powers from going to war before. Look at the Russian Empire when it joined World War I. Nicholas II made a catastrophic miscalculation that not only cost him his empire, but also cost him his family and ultimately his head. Instead of first concentrating his efforts on stabilizing his country and improving the lives of his people, he wasted his authority by sending over 1 million of his citizens into slaughter. Tsar Nicholas believed that his position as the Russian Tsar was divine. He was arrogant, and that arrogance led him to make the wrong decision. History is filled with leaders who believed they could control events once war started, only to realize too late that they had unleashed forces beyond their control. That is why a war between the United States and China would be such a dangerous gamble. Just as it was for Russia when it entered World War I and lost its empire, a war between the United States and China would be devastating. It would make the world a much darker place, and every citizen in China and the United States would be touched by the war, whether through an inability to get medical supplies, fuel, toys for children, IT devices, semiconductors, or countless other necessities. It would disturb the world order for a certain period of time. The world needs cooler heads to prevail, but the United States, especially the Trump administration, which can be extremely arrogant, needs to be careful. As the Secretary of Defense said when he made a statement on Iran, he claimed the administration was not trying to change the regime, but the regime changed. That was not true at all. We need to be very clear in stating that we do not want conflict. According to the Associated Press, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said U.S. policy toward Taiwan is unchanged after President Donald Trump met with President Xi Jinping, but he warned that it would be a terrible mistake for China to take Taiwan by force. I hope that remains the case, or we will have conflict. In the same story that I have been getting at throughout this article, the United States would be bruised, and China would be hurt badly as well. We could end up not losing the battle, but losing the war.